Pause for a moment, because what you are about to feel is not just a message, it is a quiet unveiling, something that has been forming behind the scenes long before you noticed it. There is a shift happening, subtle, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change how everything unfolds from this point forward. And the reason they are feeling shaken right now is not because something new appeared, but because something they believed they could control has slipped out of their hands. Let that sink in for a second, because this isn't about chaos, it's about realization. And realization arrives silently. You see, they were used to patterns, familiar ways of thinking, familiar ways of interacting, familiar ways of influencing others without even realizing how deeply it affected everything around them. It wasn't always intentional, but it became a habit, a rhythm they believed would always work. But something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that even they cannot fully explain. And now, they are sitting with a feeling they didn't expect. A kind of stillness that asks questions they've never asked before. Why isn't it working anymore? Why does everything feel different? Why does your energy feel untouched? Take a breath here, because this is where everything begins to shift. They are starting to see something they never saw clearly before. Not because someone told them, not because they were forced, but because something inside them has begun to reflect back the truth. And truth has a very quiet voice. It doesn't argue. It doesn't chase. It simply reveals. And right now, that revelation is unfolding inside them. But here's the part that changes everything. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to fight. You didn't have to prove anything. You didn't have to match their energy or respond to every moment. Something within you chose stillness instead. And that stillness became your strength. Don't skip this part, because this is where the deeper meaning begins to surface. What they are feeling now is not confusion, it's awareness. A kind of awareness that slowly breaks old patterns without force. And as they look back at their actions, their words, their choices, something doesn't feel the same anymore. There's a pause, a hesitation, a quiet question forming in their mind. Why did I do that? And for the first time, they are not avoiding the answer. Stay with this feeling. Because something important is waiting for you in this moment. They are beginning to recognize that the ways they once interacted with people, the subtle mind games, the unspoken tests, the emotional distance, none of it feels right anymore when they think about you. Not because you changed them, but because your presence revealed something within them they couldn't ignore. And that realization, it's not easy, it's not comfortable, it's not something they can escape quickly, because now, they see. And once someone sees, they cannot go back to not knowing. Let that echo softly. Because this is not about blame, it's about awakening. And awakenings don't arrive with noise, they arrive with clarity. A clarity that whispers. This is not who you truly are, and now, they are sitting with that whisper, trying to understand it, trying to feel it, trying to accept it. But something else is happening too, something even more powerful. They are noticing you differently, not in the way they used to, not through old patterns or assumptions, but through a lens that feels real. And that realization, it carries weight, because they are starting to understand that your energy, your presence, your way of being, was never something they could control or figure out through the same patterns they used before. You were never part of the cycle. You were the moment that revealed the cycle. Pause here. Because this is where everything becomes deeper. They are beginning to feel something they didn't expect to feel. Respect. Not forced, not spoken, but deeply felt. A quiet recognition that something about you stood untouched, unshaken, steady. And that steadiness is what they cannot ignore anymore. Something inside them is asking, what if I misunderstood everything? What if I approached this the wrong way? What if they were never meant to be treated like everyone else? And those questions, they don't disappear. They grow, slowly, silently, but powerfully. Don't rush past this. Because something meaningful is unfolding here. This is not the end of the story. This is the moment before the real shift begins. Because now, they are not just reacting. They are reflecting. And reflection is the first step toward change. But change, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in quiet moments like this. Moments where they sit alone with their thoughts, replaying things. Noticing details they once ignored, feeling emotions they once pushed aside. And in those moments, something begins to soften. Not weakness, but awareness. And awareness is powerful, because it leads to understanding. And understanding leads to something even deeper. But that part, it hasn't fully revealed itself yet. And that is where this story continues. There is a moment, almost impossible to notice from the outside, where everything inside them becomes quiet. Not empty, not lost, but quiet in a way that feels unfamiliar. Because for so long, their mind was always moving, always calculating, always trying to stay one step ahead of every situation, every emotion, every connection. It was almost automatic, like a system that never turned off. But now, that system is slowing down, and they don't fully understand why. Pause here for a second, because this is where something deeper begins. At first, they thought it was just a phase, a passing feeling, something that would disappear if they distracted themselves long enough. But no matter what they tried, the same awareness kept returning. Stronger, clearer, closer. And this time, they couldn't ignore it. Because every time they thought about you, something inside them shifted in a way that felt undeniable. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady, like a truth that refuses to be pushed away. They started remembering things differently. Not just what happened, but how it felt. The small moments. The quiet exchanges, the things you didn't say, but they could feel. And suddenly, those moments carried meaning they never noticed before. Why did that moment feel so calm? Why did their usual patterns not work the same way with you? Why did your silence feel stronger than their words? Stay with this. Because something important is waiting for you in this realization. They are beginning to understand that what they once thought was control, was actually a form of distance. A way to protect themselves, a way to avoid feeling too deeply, a way to keep everything predictable. But you didn't fit into that pattern. You didn't respond the way others did. You didn't chase, you didn't react. You didn't fall into the same rhythm. And that confused them at first. But now, it's becoming clear. Because your presence didn't challenge them loudly. It revealed them quietly. Let that settle. Because not everyone has the power to do that. And without realizing it, you became a mirror. Not one that showed them what they wanted to see, but one that showed them what they needed to understand. And that understanding is what's creating this shift. They are starting to notice patterns they never questioned before. The way they would test situations. The way they would hold back emotions. The way they would try to stay in control instead of being present. And now, it feels different. Because when they look at those patterns through the lens of your connection, something doesn't align anymore. Something feels incomplete. And that feeling, it stays. Even when they try to move on. Even when they try to distract themselves. Even when they try to convince themselves that everything is the same as before. It isn't. And deep down, they know it. Don't skip this part. Because this is where the emotional shift deepens. They are starting to feel something unfamiliar. Not regret, but recognition. Recognition that something real was there. Something that didn't need manipulation, didn't need strategy, didn't need control. Something that simply existed. And that kind of connection, it doesn't follow rules. It doesn't respond to games. It doesn't fade easily. And now, they are beginning to understand that. But understanding brings another layer. A quiet realization that asks a deeper question. What if I approached something real, with habits that were never meant for it? Pause. Because this question, it doesn't leave easily. It echoes. And with every echo, it becomes harder to ignore. They are not just thinking anymore. They are feeling. Feeling the difference between what was genuine, and what was influenced by their own patterns. Feeling the gap between what they could have experienced, and what they allowed themselves to experience. And that gap, it creates a kind of silence. A silence filled with thoughts they didn't expect to have. Moments where they sit, doing nothing, yet thinking everything. Moments where your presence returns to their mind, not as a memory, but as a feeling. A calm feeling, a steady feeling, a real feeling. And they start to realize that feeling never needed anything complicated. It didn't need effort to exist. It didn't need control to stay. It was already there, in its simplest form. But they didn't see it then. And now, they can't unsee it. Stay here for a moment. Because this is where something even more powerful begins to unfold. They are beginning to question not just their actions, but their mindset. The way they approach connections. The way they protect themselves. The way they create distance without even realizing it. And for the first time, they are not defending those patterns. They are observing them. And observation, it leads to awareness. And awareness, it changes everything. Because once someone becomes aware of their patterns, those patterns lose their power. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably, something inside them is shifting from control to understanding, from reaction to reflection, from distance to awareness. And this shift, it's not temporary. It's not something that fades overnight. It's something that stays, something that grows, something that transforms how they see everything moving forward. But here's the part they are still trying to understand. Why did this shift happen with you? And not before? Why did your presence create something no one else could? Why does your energy still feel different, even now? Take a breath. Because this is where the deeper truth begins to surface. It's not about timing. It's not about chance. It's about alignment. Something about your presence aligned with something within them that was ready to awaken. Not forced, not rushed, but ready. And when that alignment happens, it creates a shift that cannot be undone. And that's what they are feeling now. A shift they didn't plan. A realization they didn't expect. An awareness they cannot ignore. And as this awareness grows, something else begins to form. Not confusion, not uncertainty, but clarity. A slow, steady clarity that begins to answer the questions they couldn't understand before. But that clarity, it's still unfolding. It's still forming. And what it reveals next will change everything they thought they knew. And just when they thought they had reached the edge of understanding, something deeper begins to unfold. Not loudly, not all at once, but like a quiet door opening inside them, revealing a space they had never truly entered before. It's unfamiliar, not uncomfortable, but different in a way that makes them pause. Because this time, it's not about analyzing, not about figuring things out quickly, not about returning to what they already know. This time, it's about feeling something they cannot control. Take a slow breath here. Because this is where everything starts to move beyond surface level awareness. They are beginning to realize that the patterns they once relied on, the subtle ways they navigated emotions, the distance they created without noticing, were never as strong as they believed. They were just familiar. And familiarity can feel like strength, until something real comes along and shows you a different way. And you were that difference. Not because you tried to be, not because you changed yourself, but because your presence carried something they couldn't reshape, couldn't redirect, couldn't predict. And that is what stayed with them, even now, especially now. Because the more they sit with their thoughts, the more they begin to see how different everything felt with you. How conversations didn't follow their usual rhythm. How silence didn't feel like distance, but like connection. How your energy didn't demand anything, yet somehow revealed everything. Pause. Because this realization is not small. It's something that slowly reshapes the way they see themselves. They are starting to notice the contrast. The difference between connections that felt temporary, and something that felt steady without effort. The difference between interactions that required strategy, and something that simply existed. And that difference, it's becoming impossible to ignore. There are moments now, quiet ones, where they replay certain memories. Not in a way that feels heavy, but in a way that feels curious. Almost like they are seeing those moments for the first time. Details they overlooked. Feelings they didn't fully recognize. Energy they didn't understand at the time. And now, it all feels clearer. Not perfectly clear, but enough to make them stop and think. What was that? What did I miss? What was I actually feeling in that moment? Stay with this. Because something important is waiting in these questions. They are not just remembering you. They are experiencing you, through a new awareness. And that awareness changes everything. Because it removes the filters they once used. The assumptions, the expectations, the patterns. And what remains is something real, something simple, something they didn't allow themselves to fully feel before. And now, they are beginning to feel it, slowly, gently, but undeniably. And that feeling, it doesn't come with confusion. It comes with clarity, a clarity that whispers. This was different, this meant something, this still means something, let that echo softly. Because this is where the emotional depth begins to rise. They are starting to understand that what they experienced with you was not something that could be categorized, not something that could be placed into their usual way of thinking. It didn't follow their rules. It didn't respond to their patterns. It didn't fade when they expected it to. Instead, it stayed. Quietly, steadily, even when they tried to move away from it, even when they distracted themselves, even when they convinced themselves that it wasn't important, it remained. And now, they are finally allowing themselves to ask why. Why did this stay with me? Why does it still feel present? Why does it feel unfinished? Pause here. Because this is where something shifts again. They are beginning to realize that this feeling is not about the past. It's not about what happened, or what didn't happen. It's about what was real, and real things. They don't disappear easily. They don't fade just because time passes. They don't lose meaning just because they weren't fully understood in the moment. They stay until they are recognized. And that's exactly what is happening now. Recognition. A quiet, powerful recognition that changes how everything is perceived. They are starting to see you not through memory, but through truth. And that truth, it carries weight, because it shows them something about themselves they didn't expect to discover. It shows them that beneath all the patterns, beneath all the ways they protected themselves, there was always a part of them that wanted something real, something honest, something simple, something that didn't require effort to exist. And when they felt that with you, they didn't know how to respond, so they returned to what they knew: patterns, distance, control. But now, those patterns feel different, because now they can see them clearly. And clarity, it changes everything. Don't skip this moment, because something deeper is unfolding right here. They are starting to feel a shift in how they approach their own thoughts. Instead of pushing feelings away, they are sitting with them. Instead of avoiding questions, they are exploring them. Instead of returning to old patterns, they are noticing them before they take over. And that awareness, it creates space. Space for something new. Space for something real. Space for something they never allowed themselves to fully experience before. And in that space, something begins to grow. Not quickly, not forcefully, but naturally. A new understanding, a new perspective, a new way of seeing both you and themselves. And that understanding, it brings a kind of calm. A calm that feels unfamiliar, yet right. A calm that doesn't come from control, but from acceptance. Acceptance of what they felt. Acceptance of what they didn't understand before. Acceptance of the fact that something about this connection was different. And that difference, it matters. It matters more than they realized. It matters more than they expected. And now, they are beginning to feel that importance. But with that importance, comes another layer. A deeper realization that they are just starting to touch. Because understanding something is one thing, but accepting what it means, that's something else entirely. Pause. Because this is where the next shift begins. They are starting to ask themselves questions they didn't have the courage to ask before. What do I actually want? What does real connection feel like to me? What am I ready to experience? And these questions, they don't come with immediate answers. They come with reflection. With patience, with moments of stillness that allow something deeper to surface. And as they sit with these questions, something begins to change inside them. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way that feels steady and real. They are beginning to understand that what they felt with you was not something they could recreate through effort. It was something that existed, because it was meant to be experienced. And that realization, it shifts everything, because now, they are no longer looking at the connection as something that happened. They are looking at it as something that revealed revealed a part of themselves they didn't know how to access before, revealed a kind of presence they didn't know how to respond to, revealed a feeling they didn't know how to hold on to. And now, they are learning slowly, quietly, but deeply, learning what it means to be present.